Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so at this point you have finished the lesson on Louisiana Purchase together, and now you're going to part two, which is going to be two things. It's going to be kind of looking at Lewis and Clark's expedition. This is probably something you remember, at least in some part, from 7th grade. And then I will go into something called the Embargo Act, and that will wrap up Thomas Jefferson's presidency as our country has continued to grow. So we know with the Louisiana Purchase, all right, our country at this point has doubled in size. We need to figure out what in the world is in this purple area, okay? So Thomas Jefferson's going to hire two people, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, and he's going to get a group together called the Corps of Discovery, and it's going to be, a good amount of people, about 40, 50 people, to go on a path to Louisiana Territory, with the secondary goal also being they want to find a route to the Pacific Ocean. They know the Pacific Ocean's over here, but they just need to find a route that best fits the area to get there. All right, so we will watch a brain pop on them shortly, but let's just take a look of the main goals of the expedition. Number one, they want to find a practical route across the western half of the continent and kind of map out what it looks like to the Pacific Ocean. So they brought a couple of cartographers with them. Those cartographers are people who basically make maps. That's their job. So they're trying to map out the area and region as much as possible, try and give a sense of what this territory looks like. So our federal government is going to get control of it. This takes almost 2 years, this expedition, from leaving from St. Louis, Missouri, right here, going all the way to the Pacific Ocean, which is kind of close to present-day Washington State. It takes them a lot longer to get there, maybe over a year and a half, and then they actually take the same route back home pretty quickly because at this point they're just trying to get home, not necessarily looking for more stuff along the way. So that's the first thing. They want to map out what it looks like to the Pacific Ocean. Number two, they establish an American presence in the area. They want to let the Native Americans know. They want to let any of the people know there that the United States has purchased this area. At this point, they're not trying to kick any Native Americans out. They're not trying to move any Native Americans, but they are establishing that this is a newly bought territory. The French no longer own it. It is now a part of the United States. Moreover, we want to make sure a place like Spain, okay, which is where present-day Mexico is in the Spanish territory, we don't want them to expand their colony and possibly get into some conflicts with us. All right. Now, they were familiar that there was a river that we've studied on the first day of class, not the Mississippi River. Okay, the Mississippi River kind of started the Louisiana Purchase. Everything east of the Mississippi River was the current United States, and then everything west became a part of the Louisiana Purchase. We're going to look at, though, the Missouri River. Now, the Missouri River, if you go back to our first lesson, is kind of the route you see here. They're going to use this river system to kind of take them all the way across to the Louisiana Territory. So, I mean, logically, they should just kind of walk straight across. But what they decide to do is to follow the Missouri River to take them up, and the Missouri River happens to go north, and then eventually it curves to the west and heads out over into the Pacific Northwest of our country. All right. So the goal was to map out, kind of get a sense of what's going on. Then after that, they wanted to go through establish an American presence, and they use the Missouri River to do that. All right, so let's watch this brain pop to get more information on Lewis and Clark. Believe it or not, they are a big group in American history, but not a big group that you see on the Regents, so I just want to be familiar with them. There is a question or two I'll show you, but ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, it's very similar to the Boston Massacre. It's more of a 7th grade U.S. history topic, so it doesn't come up as much on the 11th grade test. All right, so let me share this screen. All right, I'll mute myself and watch this video, okay? I may or may not put the secret word in this video, so make sure you watch.
Meriwether Lewis and William Clark were two of the most famous explorers in American history. From 1804 to 1806, they led an expedition through the newly annexed Western Territory of the United States. They traveled 7,400 miles from the mouth of the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean and back. All right, enough with the credits. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson approved the Louisiana Purchase, the sale of a huge piece of land from France to the U.S., stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. With the stroke of a pen, our country doubled in size. But neither the French nor the Americans knew exactly how big the territory was, or what it was like, but the hundreds of indigenous nations who lived there did. So Jefferson put together an expedition to gather info about the land and contact the native people. Jefferson also wanted to take over the fur trade in the West. To lead the group, Jefferson chose his own secretary, Army Captain Meriwether Lewis. And Lewis chose fellow Army officer William Clark to be his partner. Lewis and Clark assembled the Corps of Discovery, a team of 31 people and 1 dog. The Corps was made up entirely of soldiers, with one exception. A black man named York, who was enslaved to William Clark. The Corps set off near St. Louis in May 1804, following the Missouri River westward in 3 boats. During these first days, Clark was busy navigating and making maps. Meanwhile, Lewis was often on shore, studying rocks, animals, and plant life. Over the course of the next 2 years, they encountered more than 50 Native American nations. They held ceremonial meetings following guidelines dictated by President Jefferson. Like this meeting with a group of Hidatsa chiefs. They were urged to trade freely with Americans and accept U.S. authority. Yeah, early on they had a tense encounter with the Lakota, also called the Teton Sioux.
Okay, pause the video now. Lakota is the secret word, so hopefully you're watching the video. You just write it at the top of your notes. Just write Lakota so I can give you full credit for the assignment for today. So the Lakota, you don't have to write the Teton Sioux, but the Lakota tribe is the word I want down. All right, so write that word down.
The Lakota chiefs weren't impressed by their gifts and presentations. They demanded that the Corps pay a much larger toll to continue up the river. When they tried to prevent the boats from leaving, weapons were drawn. Fortunately, Chief Black Buffalo stepped in and defused the crisis. But in most cases, meetings with the native people stayed friendly. In fact, the Corps depended on the people they met for survival. By late October, the expedition reached the Mandan and Hidatsa peoples in what is now North Dakota. This was the trade hub of the northern plains for Europeans as well as many native peoples. Winter was setting in, so the Corps built a fort nearby to wait out the season. Living among the Hidatsa was Toussaint Charbonneau, a French fur trader. One of his wives was a Lemhi Shoshone woman, Sacagawea. When Sacagawea was a little girl, her village had been attacked by a Hidatsa war party and she was kidnapped. Like many war hostages, she was later sold to Charbonneau. Lewis and Clark invited the pair to join their expedition as translators. Come spring, they signed on, bringing along their newborn son, Jean-Baptiste.
Okay, so Sacagawea, which you see over here, she was very helpful at the second half of the expedition, specifically because she was a friendly face that many Native Americans could see, so they came more in peace as opposed to, you saw earlier on, where in the Lewis and Clark expedition, they were getting some conflicts with Native Americans that they kind of narrowly just got by. But with her here, she makes a huge appeal to Native Americans to kind of let these guys pass, and this was huge in making sure Lewis and Clark stayed alive.
Sacagawea was only about 16, but she quickly became essential to the Corps' survival. She knew which plants to gather for food and medicine, and she acted as a guide. She also smoothed the way with native groups the Corps encountered. Having a woman with a baby along seemed like proof of the explorers' peaceful intentions. That summer, the Corps reached the Great Falls of the Missouri River. It was 80 feet high and 900 feet wide, and the only way through was around. They carried 3 boats and all their supplies on the 18-mile detour. It took 31 days in 100-degree heat, broken by massive storms, including hail. 2 months later, they faced their next big challenge, the Rocky Mountains. To help them across, Sacagawea negotiated a trade for horses with her people, the Shoshone. In August, the group began a dangerous trek over the snow-covered peaks. Food supplies ran low, and the men and horses nearly starved to death. But after 11 desperate days, they finally emerged on the other side. They were saved by the Nimipu, also called the Nez Perce, who helped them recover. Finally, after a year and a half of traveling, they reached the Pacific Ocean. They spent the winter in the territory of the Clackamas people in what is now Oregon, and then set out for home in March of 1806. When they passed back through the Hidatsa villages, Sacagawea, Jean-Baptiste, and Charbonneau stayed behind. In September, the rest of the expedition finally made it back to St. Louis. It had been nearly 2.5 years since they'd left. Well, for one thing, the Corps was the first group from the U.S. to reach the Pacific by land. They also produced the first accurate maps of the American Northwest, over 140 during the course of the journey. They documented hundreds of species of plants and animals, established friendly relations with dozens of Native American nations, and recorded reams of information about their peoples and cultures, and sparked a young country's imagination, inspiring its expansion into the western frontier. Tragically, that would result in great hardship for many of the peoples who'd helped them on their journey. Like so much in American history, opportunity for some came at the cost of great loss for others. In ways they could never anticipate, Lewis and Clark's historic journey changed this country forever.
All right, guys and girls. So that was hopefully a good little explanation of the Lewis and Clark journey. Let's take a look at this Regents question coming up here. You may have to zoom in a little. I could recognize that it's not so good. But I want to just show you a couple things. So eventually in your textbook, you'll learn about someone called Zebulon Pike. This map shows the exploration routes of Lewis and Clark and Zebulon Pike. A valid conclusion based on this map is that these expeditions what? So obviously when you look through it, you see Zebulon Pike. I know it's tough to see. Would use the Arkansas River to get to where he had to go to. And Lewis and Clark, of course, use the Missouri River to go where they have to get to. So the correct answer here would be the correct answer would be 3. Use the river systems to help them on their journeys. Definitely can't be 4 because they didn't take the most direct route. If St. Louis is here, they didn't go straight across. Okay, they kind of went up and around. Number 2, it can't be they avoided land claimed by other countries. That would be true, maybe, but Zebulon Pike went through Mexico, and then eventually we go into Oregon country, which is not owned by the United States at the time, and faced few barriers from natural features. Well, no, we have the Rocky Mountains, so that's not true. All right. Last thing you're copying down, the last major thing Thomas Jefferson does is something called an Embargo Act. All right. So if you need to pause the video to copy this down, please do. But please listen as I kind of go through it. So an embargo is what's known as officially a ban on trade with a particular country. So if there's a country in a war, if there's a country that you're having problems with, you can place an embargo on a particular country. This is something that happens a lot through U.S. history. This is underratedly one of the reasons why America will get into something called World War II, which we'll talk about soon because of an embargo on Japan. But let's go through what this was. So we have the specific Embargo Act under Thomas Jefferson, which was in 1807. So Britain and France still fighting. Okay, they were in a war with each other again. They're constantly fighting. So you know what Thomas Jefferson does, going along with the foreign policy idea of George Washington and staying neutral? He decides, you know what, we can't be trading with these countries, because if you start trading with these countries, those Britain or France may take that as either an act of war if you're trading with the opposite country, or maybe they'll start asking favors. So we need to end that for the time being. So the Embargo Act was a ban on trade with Britain and France. Okay, and this was really important because this was, again, trying to keep us out of war, to try and keep us out of conflict, because we're such a new country. We've just doubled our country in size. We can't be trying to go and solve problems in other countries around the world at this point. So America is going to basically place this embargo. If you were living in the United States, if you were a merchant, you cannot trade with the countries of Britain and France. Okay. Now, I'll clarify this between a tariff, okay, but there is no trading going on until their wars are over, and this would last at least until the end of Jefferson's presidency and until around 1811 or 1812, I believe. This act was an attempt to avoid political conflict with the rest of the world, just like George Washington wanted his countrymen to do. Jefferson obviously was the Secretary of State under George Washington. He was friendly with George Washington. He's following that same idea and same belief that we need to make sure we stay out of foreign affairs, stay neutral, and there's no better way of staying neutral than just avoiding this situation in its entirety. So trading, not allowed under the Embargo Act under Thomas Jefferson. All right. I want to just clarify two things before we end this video and end class officially today. Again, if you are not done copying, just pause the video. It's a perfect thing, perfect situation. So two confusing aspects of U.S. history clarified. I'm sure I've already explained this. Number one, Thomas Jefferson, when he was the vice president under Adams, when he was in the cabinet under George Washington, he was the biggest constructionist. He never wanted to use the elastic clause. He said whatever's in the Constitution, that's what the federal government could do. So he said that it should not be used, the elastic clause, when you want a national bank. But when the shoe comes on the other foot, and he is now the president, and he's got an opportunity to make one of the best land deals in American history, easily one of the best purchases ever, he kind of comes around to, oh yeah, that elastic clause makes sense in this situation, right? If I could sign a treaty, if we could sign a treaty as a country, then obviously we could definitely buy land, so it was just funny because there's nothing on buying land in the Constitution, but Thomas Jefferson definitely contradicts himself, definitely is a little bit hypocritical from this aspect. So I just want to make sure that's clear. So depending on the situation you're talking about, he's either a strict constructionist that believes every word of the Constitution, or he starts to use the elastic clause towards the later part of his life. I just want to clarify, Alexander Hamilton, the year he dies. Give me 1 second. He dies a year or two after the. So I think he dies in 1804 from a duel with Aaron Burr, and I know there were some writings and works basically where Hamilton was calling Jefferson a hypocrite for using the elastic clause. Now that all of a sudden he was president, but it's just funny stuff. All right. The second thing, tariffs and embargoes both have to do with trade, but are not the same thing. All right. They both limit trade where, how do I put this? If you have a tariff on another country and you try and trade with that country, that's a tax. So that's going to limit the amount of trade. Embargoes are complete bans. So overall, you will be trading less with a country, whether there's a tariff or an embargo, but an embargo goes a lot further. You're not allowed to trade with that country at all. A tariff you can trade, but you're going to pay an extra fee to the government so you could trade with those countries. And in both ways, both tariffs and embargoes do help with at-home or domestic manufacturing. If you were someone, like tea is a good example, right? If you were someone selling tea in the United States and now there's an embargo on British tea, that's probably going to indirectly help your company. That's not a bad thing. But tariffs and embargoes are a little bit different. So please keep that in mind. All right. Last question here. All right. Take a look at it, and then we'll be done for the period. Remember, your secret word, which you saw in the brain pop, has to be added to the top of your notes. You're going to put the notes at the top. You're going to put the notes in the Google Doc or take a photo of it and post it into the Google Classroom. All right. I hope you guys have a good election day tomorrow as well. What was a common goal of the Proclamation of Neutrality and the Embargo Act? So how does Washington's Proclamation of Neutrality during his farewell address and the Embargo Acts kind of stay similar? The correct answer in this case is going to be 2, avoiding conflicts with European nations. All right. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and enjoy Election Day. And I will see you all on Monday. All right. And again, there will be a lesson. I think I've mentioned this already. There will be a lesson, completely optional. Just if you want some more information on the 2020 election, I posted something. I'll post something tomorrow morning. All right. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.